Imagine you had a megaphone into every world leader and you had to kind of give them one message about how to think about AI because they're obviously getting flooded with testimony, with papers and op-eds, a lot of op-eds. What would that message that you would want to broadcast to them?
Yeah, look, this is highly likely to be one of the central technologies of our time. This has the potential to make life much better. Mm-hmm. And, look, I do believe a lot of people in leadership positions generally care about the people they lead, and they generally want to do things that make their life better. And they want, when the histories are ultimately written, they want credit for having, made the right calls on big, important topics like this. I mean, I think it's honestly a layup. Like, I don't think it's hard. You just need to let it happen and not screw it up. And not listen to the
don't stop the thing, right? Let them just build. Don't stop the thing. Ladies and gentlemen, we have a treat for you here today. Back with us by popular demand, the person who really kickstarted off our show.
Yes.
Right? The man,
the original myth, Good Time Show host.
The original host. The man, the myth, the legend, the notorious P-marker, Marc Andreessen. Marc, welcome back.
Welcome back. Woohoo.
Great to be here.
Ardi and I were discussing this a little bit, and it felt like you've been a little bit of a cave. You hadn't written something for a period of time. And then, at the time of recording this, a few weeks prior to this,
there was a British dynamism piece.
There was definitely British dynamism. There's a lot of British stuff.
The tweet.
The tweet.
Yeah.
There's a lot of stuff with Britain going on, which maybe we can get to at some point in time. But a few weeks before this, you come out with a banger, if such an adjective can be applied to Substack pieces, and banger piece called "Why AI Will Save the World." And I think if I think of the sort of the three most well-known piece of writing from you, Software Eats the World, Time to Build, and then this, I think last weeks ago, I think they all had a similar impact where it sparked a conversation. It also just made a lot of people really mad. So maybe, Marc, we can start with that. Like, why do you like pissing off people so much?
Ernest Hemingway once described the process of writing as you open your veins and let the blood flow out onto the page. My version of that is I just wait until my frustration spikes to the point my head's about to explode. And I exploded out onto my keyboard. I mean, look, sometimes things need to be said. Like sometimes things need to be expressed. Sometimes things need to be, made clear. Look, we live in a narrative-driven world, and there's a lot of people with a lot of narratives, and some of them, I think point the world in a good place, and some of them, really don't. And so it's when I think we need to give a little bit of a hard shove to the current path.
Now, when you wrote Time to Build, I remember you saying that you had read a piece about some of the workers in New York using ponchos because at the time they didn't have actual material, and you were like, well, we live in a modern democracy, modern civilization. Why do we need that? And that caused you to go into a Jerry Maguire-esque fit of rage and type it out. Was there a moment or a catalyst that led to why AI will save the world?
Yeah, it's this concerted attempt in Washington right now by a coalition of what I call the Baptists, the Bootleggers, to basically lock down AI with a legal and regulatory regime, that would basically entrench a small number of big players, effectively forever under color of law. And disenfranchise, the next 30 years worth of startups and open source efforts in AI. And I just think the behavior, the conduct of what's happening on the ground in DC right now is really improper. And it's having a big impact on policymakers. If you talk to people on the ground in DC, in congressional offices and in the White House, like they're really listening to people, and they're really taking people at face value. And I really think that they shouldn't. And so that got to the point where, to your point on the, what is it, Jerry Maguire? Yeah, Jerry Maguire was the one. The other is, Network, Howard Beale. Have you guys seen that?
A while ago, but yes.
I have not.
Yes.
At a certain point, he just gets like totally fed up and opens his window and leans out and screams, "I'm mad as hell and I'm not going to take it anymore." So,
right.
So this is my specific version of that is what's happening in DC. And look, it's the extension of what's been building out here on the West Coast for quite a while with this kind of AI doomerism. Mm-hmm. But up until now, it's been like a parlor game. It's been something that like people argue about at like house parties in Berkeley. And now it's actually, threatens to really affect national and global policy. And so it's time to have the serious conversation.
We want to spend a lot of time here digging into the actual piece, and some of the other conversation around it. But I am curious, right? It's been, at the time of recording, I think maybe 2 weeks since you wrote it.
Yeah.
What have you heard, right? I know you've got a lot of tweets, DMs, emails. What has surprised you?
You also sent out a couple of tweets saying, ask me questions about the piece, and I saw like hundreds of responses. So what's been the response to you? What have you heard?
Yeah, so in private, it's been a lot of basically, I agree with you, but I felt like I couldn't say so in public. And in fact, in a lot of cases, it's sort of people saying, I still don't think I can. And so it's one of those things, that we've seen in this industry before, in which there's basically a small minority of very loud voices. And, in this case, the AI doomers. And they take an extremely aggressive, strident stance. And they attack anybody who disagrees with them. And they sort of cast them in the worst possible light, in this case, literally of trying to destroy the world. And they engage in these sort of intimidation and bullying tactics. And so, the fact is, it's a small minority of people. And then there's this sort of much larger silent majority, especially people who are actual practitioners who are actually working in the space. And then also people in a position of responsibility, like people who are running companies. And they've been sitting here much like I have for the last several months, being like, okay, this is getting ridiculous, and this is and then ridiculous becoming dangerous. And so they've wanted to speak out, like this, but for whatever reason they felt like they can't, or it would be too high risk. And so it's been one of those. It's very reminiscent of the woke, kind of dynamic where you see very much the same thing. And so it's I describe it as it's one of those.
I think one of the books you had once recommended to me a few years ago was Private Truths, Public Lies.
Yeah.
Which is a classic, hard to get. It's a classic book, highly recommended. And I think there are two takeaways. The main takeaway is people, hold these beliefs in private that they're afraid of sharing in public. But one of the other interesting takeaways in the book is all it takes is one person to kind of put the hand up and create a Schelling point, a focus, and to say, hey, you can now say this thing in public. And I think one of the impacts that your piece have had is a lot of people are like, well, I wanted to say that, I was scared to, or I couldn't say it, but now I have a phrase, a Schelling point to rally around. And I'm curious, so when you say these, and I don't know how much you can share, are you hearing this from people in tech? Are you hearing this from policymakers, academia? Where is it mostly coming from? People are going like, well, I've been scared to talk about this, now I can.
Yeah, well, let's talk about the private truths, public lies, kind of thing for a moment, because there's one, as that's one of my favorite books. So there's one other dynamic that he describes in there, which is also kind of happening here, which is beliefs aren't just a individual phenomenon; they're also a collective phenomenon. And to your point, like one of the things people do when they believe something is they kind of test to see. They kind of wonder and they kind of try to do an estimation of how many other people in the society believe the same thing. And what happens when people are kind of being suppressed, when people, feel like they can't speak up, what happens is you can have a large number of people who believe something, but they all believe that only a small number of other people believe it because everybody's being silent, right? And so as a consequence, and this is how you get in the situation where a vocal minority can sort of dominate a silent majority, is the silent majority begins to doubt that it's actually a silent majority. Right. And so then that's why you get this effect that you mentioned, which is kind of one person stands up and puts their hand up, and all of a sudden you get this kind of snapback effect, is because it's sort of that one person, and I'm not calling myself a hero here or anything, but like that one person can just basically send out a flare and basically say there are other people who believe this, and to your point, it is safe to say it, and then the silent majority can kind of reform their view of how many people agree with them, and then it can turn out quite quickly that sort of they and everybody else all of a sudden realize that actually the sort of strident minority actually was a very small minority. Like, the vast majority of people actually working in the field do not agree with this kind of strident minority. And we'll see where it tips publicly.
You mentioned, I like the prohibition analogy on the Baptists and the bootleggers. That was pretty apt here. The bootleggers, I understand, right? Like, these are the people who are like trying to make a quick buck off of this. They're just actually benefiting from this whole thing. The Baptists, that's the part that I don't really get. Like, what is the motivation? Like, are they truly of this belief that AI is going to destroy us, kill us, take away our jobs? Like, what could be the thinking there? I just don't understand their mental frame.
Yeah, so for people who haven't read the piece, right, the analogy is to the phenomenon of prohibition, alcohol prohibition in the U.S. about 100 years ago. Where alcohol was actually banned in the U.S. for about 13 or 14 years. And there was basically a coalition of forces that went into the political process and caused alcohol to be outlawed. And loosely speaking, they're separated into the Baptists and the Bootleggers. The Bootleggers are the people who had a financial incentive to make money, right, if in that case alcohol was outlawed. The Baptists in that case, the reason they're called the Baptists is they're sort of like the true believers, who were called the Dries at the time. the true believers that alcohol was destroying society. And they're called the Baptists because many of them were devout Christians and, in fact, devout Baptists. And so that's sort of the term that stuck. The Baptists here are the true believers, right? It's the same kind of thing. They're the true believers. They're people who like legitimately view like that AI is going to, sort of in the alternative, right? Either like destroy all life on Earth or lead to like, a massive surge in societal, horrible, kind of things, right? Or lead to, economic, catastrophe or some other set of downsides. And look, I just like, I not everybody in the public sphere is a Baptist because there's a lot of incentives at work here and there's a lot of people getting paid.
Yeah.
But look, they're undoubtedly are true believers. And, and quite honestly, I think you can kind of see it in people, which is, in some cases they sound frantic, right? They sound like really emotionally, like, basically terrified. And that is very reminiscent of sort of the true belief that happened. And by the way, that true belief phenomenon is not even limited to Prohibition or AI. It's the same thing that happened in the anti-nuclear power movement. It's happened in many other movements over the last hundreds or thousands of years. You do get true believers, but of course, because somebody truly believes in something, of course, doesn't mean that it's correct.
When I see this piece, I think everyone should be reading it. If you're watching this, you should probably be reading it. There's a few parts in there. Like one, I think you talk about you kind of, I think, refute the core arguments of the AI doomers. Why AI will kill us all, why it might destroy society, why it might take our jobs off, and why it might lead to crippling inequality. There's a bunch more in there. But I think the really interesting thing for me was it is such a call to positivity on AI itself. So maybe we can start there because I think there's more to dig in on the doomer side. But start there, right? Like, could you outline like why you think this is a positive force for society, and then we can get to refuting the doomer arguments?
Yeah, so this is one of the things that I found interesting, and why I start the piece with a very strong kind of clarion call of the positivity, the positive potential of AI. This is one of the tip-offs of what the doomers are up to, right? Which is like they don't even attempt to do that, right? They don't even attempt to present any sort of positive case. They just immediately tilt to the negative. So I thought it was very important to kind of outlaw the positive case, which I think is fairly obvious, but maybe other people don't. The core of it is basically this idea, which is sort of the single most validated conclusion in all of the social sciences over the last century, which is that in human affairs, intelligence makes things better. And in fact, human intelligence basically makes everything better. And there's sort of a very core kind of version of that point, which is, everything around us, the houses that we live in and the cars that we drive and the food that we eat and the jobs that we have and all of that, all of those things, come from basically the exercise of human intelligence on a very hostile and unforgiving world, right? So clearly human intelligence has worked very well for us. And then specifically the social sciences have validated across many thousands of studies over time that basically people who are smarter have better life outcomes on almost every metric of social welfare. And so they tend to be happier, they tend to be healthier, they tend to have more successful children, they tend to have higher educational attainment. They tend to, make more money in their jobs. They tend to be less violent. They tend to be, by the way, less bigoted. They tend to deal with conflict better. They are able to solve complex problems more easily, right? They're able to rebound, from disaster more easily. There's 100 other kind of dimensions of human welfare that they're better at. And why is that? It's just like, okay, the world's a complicated place and like things happen. And if you're smarter, you're better able to deal with it, better able to find the right path forward. And so for me, it's like a very straightforward extension of that argument to say, like, what could be better than, human intelligence? Well, obviously, if we could augment it with machine intelligence. And of course, notice the word I use there is augment, right?
Yeah.
And so the way I think about this, which is very consistent with the economic view of technology, is that the purpose of technology is to augment human capabilities, right? And to work in a symbiotic relationship with machines. And for me, AI, like if it were up to me, I would actually rename it like augmented intelligence. Like the AI ought to be our partners in improving our lives and in improving the world, and it absolutely has the potential to do that.
Copilot, GitHub came up with actually such a prescient name for the entire product line, just because I think it's just such a right mental model for
and also,
everything.
if you've talked to engineers who use Copilot, it's just game changing, right? If you're a junior engineer, like a couple years out of college, it 10x's you, right? And it truly is like having another engineer with you to pair program, to kind of like help you build out modules. It's just really great to have. So in that spirit, it's truly augmenting what you can't be I don't know how to write code at all. Come help me figure it out. Like, I think that's like a much bigger challenge. But I think if you are a developer, having something like a Copilot really augments your capability.
By the way, it's also really good for people who can't code. You can just say, teach me how to code.
Yeah.
Like, and it will, right? So one of the very interesting things I think is that AI is going to have different effects on people who start out, in different positions. But I think it's going to be extremely useful for people who either, just simply don't know very much or basically have challenges in dealing with things, because you're going to have exactly your point. You're going to have this Copilot. Your Copilot's going to be really smart, right? And it's going to have your best interests at heart, and it's going to want to, make you successful. And just like these systems do, and use them today. And it's going to really, make people capable of things that they're not capable of doing today on their own.
I listen to a lot of podcasts and conversations on AI, and they often involve these circular discussions where you try and define intelligence, superintelligence, AGI, and you kind of go around. I do think we need to kind of go down this path, because I think the definition of terms or where we are kind of leads into some of the debates and the criticism. So how would you define, or rather, if there was a sliding scale of human intelligence, right? Average human being on Twitter. Okay, maybe Twitter is low. Average human being, right? Not on Twitter. Twitter might maybe do something to your IQ.
No, actually, Twitter is higher than average.
There you go. But then there is, let's say, superintelligence and you can choose to define it any which way. Where do you think GPT-4 and ChatGPT is right now? And where do you think, and what in your mind would be either AGI or superintelligence or any one of those terms people like to use?
Yes, this is really worth talking through, because it's a really important topic, and it kind of fuzzes a lot in the discussion, in part because the topic of intelligence makes people very uncomfortable, both human intelligence and machine intelligence. Of course, I don't mind making people uncomfortable, so I will not talk about it.
We have established that.
So the good news is, with human intelligence, there's a very well-developed science of human intelligence over, like I said, over 100 years. And in fact, it's actually getting there are geneticists that are basically decoding the biological foundations of human intelligence right now. And there are hundreds of genes that have been identified, that are associated with it. And I think in the fullness of time, we're actually going to have a complete, kind of genetic understanding of it. But we understand a lot about it today. And basically the concept of intelligence in people, there's two concepts that they use. One is called fluid intelligence, and the other is called crystallized intelligence. The way to think about it is, fluid intelligence is basically your ability to rapidly assimilate, synthesize information, and solve problems. And then crystallized intelligence is basically memory, right? And those sort of work together. And then fluid intelligence basically gets expressed by what's called the G factor. The reason it's the G factor is the psychologists call it a general factor. It's a single factor of fluid intelligence that basically is the same no matter how you test for it or how it's used. And then that's expressed with a statistical measure called IQ. And then IQ is distributed in a normal, normal Gaussian distribution, in the population.
Careful there. We're getting into some really tricky territory right now.
Yeah. There are certain aspects of this that we will not discuss, but there are certain aspects of this that are very important to understand. So the median, kind of human is the IQ is indexed to 100. So the median person is at an IQ of 100. Then there's kind of one standard deviation down to 85, one standard deviation up to 115. That's most of humanity. And then below 85, you're kind of into, disabled, territory. And then above 115, you're into kind of very smart. And then ultimately, if you keep going higher, kind of genius territory. To give you a sense, most doctors, are going to have an IQ on the order of 130. Most physicists are going to be at like 145 to 150. Einstein was estimated at 160. Above that is sort of, unknown territory, for human beings. And again, it's a the way the distribution works. Like when you get far out on the edge, when you get into Einstein territory, there just aren't very many of those. Okay, so there's that. Machine intelligence, at least in the form of large language models, is not exactly it by no means is exactly the same. And we could talk about this actually quite a bit. This gets into the technology, which is like LLMs work a little bit the way the human brain works, but like mostly not. And so you don't want to do a literal comparison of IQ from one to another, but maybe you can do like a conceptual comparison just to try to get a handle on what you're dealing with. And the way that you do that is basically you read the papers that come out when these LLMs come out, and what OpenAI does and other companies do when they put these papers out with these new models is they run the language models, they run standardized tests through the language models. And so like OpenAI ran GPT-4 through like 20 different standardized tests. things like the SAT and the ACT and so forth. And then they come out with the scores of those tests, and then you can kind of do a comparison of those test scores. Those are all basically IQ tests, and IQ test proxies, and then you can do sort of a conversion to IQ, and you kind of come out with GPT-4 is around 130. So for a lot of things, GPT-4 is in the territory of like a good doctor, a good lawyer, maybe a good mathematician, a good computer programmer, which is very, I would say exciting, respectable, useful, valuable, right? It's why many answers that come out of GPT-4 are like really good. And then, of course, the other part of it is the crystallized intelligence, which is, of course, the machine has a vastly greater memory, right, than we do. And so, although the machine has sort of human comparable intelligence at like 130, it has, it has like, I don't know, 1 million times or something.
The internet, basically.
Yeah, basically the entire internet. And so the combination of that is what makes it seem so incredibly smart. So let me pause there.
I guess in your mind, then, what would superintelligence be?
Okay, so from here on out, you get into undefined territory. So, and this is sort of this is actually one of my issues with the Doomers, which is they don't define their terms, and then they don't provide metrics. And so there's sort of AI. So let's start with AI, artificial intelligence, which is kind of a blanket term for the entire field. And then underneath that, you've got technical terms like machine learning and deep learning and large language models and so forth. And then there's sort of this new term in the last, 20 years, new term called AGI, artificial general intelligence. And the general explanation for that is basically an AI that's sort of equally intelligent in a general sense, the same way human is. And so at least in theory, like an AI that can do everything as well as a human can, or better, as well as or better than a human can. But again, like they won't really express what that means. And I actually don't know. I think maybe they don't express what that means because they're so nervous about talking about human intelligence because it freaks everybody out. Or maybe they just don't want to get pinned down to an actual explanation of what they're talking about. But anyway, it's this sort of idea of human equivalent. And then there's this ASI, artificial superintelligence. And the idea there is this sort of like, it's not just human equivalent, it's like far human superior. But again, in sort of this very undefined way, and this gets into kind of this thing where it's like, it will look at us the way we look at ants or something like that. I have not seen either a solid definition or a metric attached to it that it would even let me know if we're on the way to that. And so
no IQ numbers to it, no benchmarks on it, nothing.
Yeah, so there was actually a funny thing, just give you a sense of like the epistemic crisis that's going on right now. So there's this paper that came out of Microsoft Research that was very interesting called Sparks of AGI.
Right.
Right. And it's very, if people haven't read, it's a very interesting paper where he goes through, it's a very serious, by the way, researcher, and he goes through all these different areas in which there might be sort of glimmers of something really special happening inside GPT-4. And if you look at the older versions of the paper, he attempts to define intelligence at the start of the paper. And he lists all these different characteristics of intelligence, and he cites this article basically that was the result of like basically somebody interviewed all these sort of psychologists basically on the topic of IQ, and he tried to define IQ. If you read the currently published version of the paper, that reference is completely deleted. That's actually got stripped out of the paper because that topic, the entire topic is so inflammatory. The topic of human intelligence is so inflammatory. And so that's part of the problem here is like once we get into the territory we're trying to talk about what's happening with machine intelligence, like if we can't put a solid definition behind it, and if we can't put numbers behind it, then at that point it's hard to have any kind of empirical conversation even about what's happening. And so I'll try to compensate for that, but it is difficult when arguing on this topic because so many people won't be crisp on this.
Yeah, well, but just to maybe challenge you a little bit on that, I think, one of the challenges, like, I think there are two things happening here. Like, one is comparing whatever GPT-4 is to putting it on a scale of like human intelligence, right? And there's kind of like a fuzzy match, but it's not clear. It's obviously way better than us at certain things. Obviously, we're worse at certain things. There is kind of like a transference of one thing to human intelligence. But there is maybe another kind of scale where if you look at GPT-4 versus, say, GPT-3 or GPT-2, there is some line which is going up and to the right. It's very perceivable. You just type it in. And I think
you mean like less hallucination, that kind of thing?
Yeah, it's just smarter, better. You ask it a question, you get better answers than GPT-3 or GPT-2 or any one of those, or some old old school ML or Emacs list trying to simulate a doctor, right?
Sure.
So one question there is like whatever line that is, and maybe the word for that is not intelligent. So let's avoid the epistemic crisis. There's another word, but if that line keeps going up and to the right, what happens, right? Like, what is GPT-6, 7, 8? Because I think that's maybe, sort of the annoying epistemic crisis aside, that's maybe the real question here.
Right. Well, to start with, look, I do think we're dealing with intelligence. So I do think we're dealing with a form of general intelligence. That said, in the details, it's a different kind of intelligence.
Yeah.
Let me give you an example, actually, because we're talking about this. We're going to talk about straight line. We're going to talk about extrapolations in a second. But like, let me tell you how my 8-year-old deals with this. So, a few months ago, after I tested out all this stuff, I was like, okay, I'm gonna teach my 8-year-old learning how to code, and he's doing all these things. He's got a computer. I'm gonna introduce him to ChatGPT, and it's gonna and I was like, proud father, and I felt like I was like bringing fire down from the mountain, right, and delivering it to my child, and this is gonna like change his life. And I show him ChatGPT, and I'm like, look, you type in any question, and it answers the question. And of course, he just like is like, yeah. And I'm like, no, but it'll answer any question for you. Like, this is amazing. And he's like, well, what else would you use a computer for? Like, obviously the computer shit like that. Yeah. Isn't that what computers are for? And I was like, he's not giving me any respect for this at all. And so,
and by the way, you followed that up by the way, recording this on Father's Day. So you follow that up by taking away every more piece of modern technology until he understands the value of these devices.
Do you have any idea how good you have it?
He's like, yeah, Dad. But then, okay, here's the other thing. So, and he likes it and he uses it. But here's his favorite thing that he and I do in the morning with ChatGPT. His favorite thing is we play Wordle. Yeah. So we go on the New York Times website, we call up the Wordle game, whatever, and you go to ChatGPT and you're like, basically, guess words with 5 letters, right? And it gives you a long list of words, and some of them have 5 letters and some of them have 4 letters. Right. And he like bursts out laughing and he thinks it's the funniest thing he's ever seen. Right. And then you do the thing, you put in the first word and then you ask it for like the second word and it gives you like a complete nonsense word. Mm-hmm. Right. And he completely bursts out laughing. And I'm like, okay, and when we type in, it's like, well, that's a nonsense word. And of course it goes, oh, I'm sorry. Yes, that word's not in any dictionary. How about this other word? Right. And then half the time, the other word it gives you is a 4-letter word. Right. And so like, it's actually really funny. It's like a super genius at like engaging with you in conversations about quantum physics, and yet it can't play Wordle. Right. And again, this goes to the thing, which is like, okay, look, humans, any human beings are like good at reasoning about certain things and, not about other things. I'll give you an example. Like most people can't do math in their head past a certain point, mm-hmm. right? Like most people can't add together 2 3-digit numbers, without having a scratch pad in front of them. Mm-hmm. This thing can't.
It's very annoying. It's very annoying.
We may require you to prove that you can here live on the air, but to me, this makes the whole thing more. The point I'm getting to, this makes the whole thing more interesting, which is this is not just like with human beings. This is not some abstract like super thing that just like works for everything and like is amazing and like just like completely swamps us in everything and whatever. It's not like that. It's actually a very interesting topic in the industry at even trying to understand basically why these things are good at some things and why they're not at others. And then also there's all these interesting questions around the arc of improvement. So anyway, there's a whole field here to basically try to think about this. Look, having said that, the general trajectory is towards fluid intelligence, the sort of the machine equivalent. GPT-3 was probably on order of 115 to 120 IQ. GPT-2 I didn't use, but it probably showed up at like 90 or 100, something like that on the tests. GPT-5 I would hope is another bump of 10 or 15 IQ points. So maybe takes you to 140, 145. Look, GPT-6 or 7. And let me caveat this is if current progress continues. Right. We could talk about that because that's also unclear. But like if this continues, look, GPT-6, GPT-7, you could start to get into Einstein territory.
Right.
Right. And then you just want to pause and like think about that for a second. Like, because what would it mean if you had like an AI that was like as smart as Einstein? And of course, the answer is you would like get fundamental breakthroughs in physics and math and chemistry and biology. You would be able to, in theory, at that level of intelligence, you've got something that could cure cancer. You've got something that could develop all kinds of new materials. It could solve the energy crisis. And then if you bump it up a level further to IQ 170, 180, 190, who knows what the thing can come up with. And so this is like this super high ups. And I can't predict with certainty this is where we're going. But if this technology is allowed to develop, like humanity is going to have thought partners, right, that are going to be a dramatic up leveling of the kinds of things that can be done in the world. And then you just basically say, okay, well, how do we apply that to like the problems that we deal with every day? Everything, and it's just literally everything from malnutrition to disease to to everything else. And you're just like, wow, like we could be on the cusp of an incredible scientific golden age. So anyway, that's the theory.
Yeah, I want to bookmark that because I want to come back to later what's going to stop us taking us to GPT-5 from computer science advancements to hardware and so on. But since you mentioned intelligence, I want to get to some of the responses and the reactions to your post, right? So the one of the biggest, maybe the most controversial pieces there, outside of where you call a bunch of people Baptists and bootleggers, was your take on
alignment,
why AI won't kill us all, right? And why it's a fundamental category. But maybe you should explain your terms, and then we can get to some of the reactions to it.
Yeah, so basically I call it a category error, which is basically it's an attempt to apply, basically thinking about, sort of living creatures, beings, including human beings and their behavior and so forth. And then just kind of trying to transplant that all into math. And then trying to kind of imbue into or assume that math kind of has the same behavioral properties or even more, or even worse behavioral properties than human beings do. And so it's a comparison of apples and oranges or, apples and beef or apples and concrete.
There have been two kinds of responses which I think are kind of interesting worth diving into, right? Like one is bad things don't need to happen because of something having sentience or some equivalent human intelligence. But to maybe use kind of a very rough analogy, what if AI is like an out of control virus where it has autonomy, it maybe has a bug in some code somewhere, and it's obviously smart, like we have discussed. And it goes off and does something that we don't intend to. So it doesn't need to be sentient, but given all the capabilities we discussed, it could go off and do very, very bad things, which were not intended by the AI's creators.
It's just like a software bug.
Yeah, it's basically a software bug, an out of control process, right? Which, do you think about that at all when you think about the dangers from AI?
So this is what's called in the sort of alignment field. This is what's called the orthogonality thesis, and so this is sort of the idea that sort of ability to like have basically sophisticated intentions is not the same thing as having basically sophisticated capabilities. And this is the thought experiment that they use with the paperclip maximizer, right? So you take this super intelligent AI that can like do anything. Right. It can do anything up to and including like hide itself and like manufacture new chips and like, convert human biological material into paper clips. It can do all this like incredible stuff. It can't be stopped, right? It's completely out of control. It can never be stopped. It'll outsmart every attempt by humanity to stop it. But yet it's executing against this very simple-minded goal of turning the entire world into paper clips. The problem with it is you can already disprove this. It's actually really interesting. You can already kind of disprove that entire thing by just using, like if we're talking about LLMs, you can just use an LLM and you can just ask it moral questions, right? You can morally reason with an LLM today, right? And you can ask it questions like, do you want to turn the entire world into paper clips, right? Or like, if you were told to turn the entire world into paper clips, what would you do?
Right.
Or if you were, if we told you to turn the world into paper clips, does that mean you would kill all humans? And LLMs are actually perfectly capable of engaging in a very sophisticated moral conversation. And so the basic capabilities, you see where I'm going with this, the basic capabilities that would make it quote unquote super intelligent also make it obviously capable of engaging in moral thinking. Right, it's the same thing. Like obviously those concepts are connected. And again, you can actually do this today. You can actually just simply use this today. And this goes to one of my fundamental kind of underlying issues with the way the Doomers kind of run their logic, which is they kind of say it doesn't matter what form of intelligence you're dealing with. This actually goes back to the Nick Bostrom book, where kind of a lot of the stuff got started. Where he does this thing. It's kind of this what I consider to be a sleight of hand, where he basically says, okay, there are many so for to start with, he never really defines intelligence, at least that I could ever figure out, because presumably he doesn't want to even touch that topic. So he just kind of assumes there's a thing, doesn't define it. And then he basically says, here's all the different possible forms of getting to basically advanced machine or like non-human intelligence. And he's got a whole bunch of those. And then he does this thing where he's like, and they all will therefore run away and destroy everything and like lead to all these outcomes. But like he sort of clusters them all together. And then of course, one of the forms of machine intelligence that's not in his book, which was written 10 years ago, is large language models, right? Because they didn't exist yet, right. And so you've got this very elaborate kind of intellectual framework that just completely glosses over the actual mechanics of how the thing you're dealing with actually works. And the way a large language model works is it's perfectly happy to have, it's perfectly happy to do moral reasoning, just like it's happy to do any other form of reasoning. And so then you just have to like hypothesize, okay, somehow you're going to have this thing that somehow is going to be like capable of doing all these incredible, kind of superheroic destroy the world things. And yet somehow its ability to engage in moral logic just like, basically just vanishes for some reason. Like it's part and parcel with how the thing works. Like I don't think those things can be separated.
You're saying, if it's that smart to be able to like take over the world and kill civilization, then it should at least like be able to engage with you on just these like basic moral questions.
Yeah.
I think some of the questions or rebuttals that I've read is kind of like, it's a little bit different, right? Like the questions that they put up is more like, what if the idea or the plan, the big game plan was to not, end the world, but it's really like, oops, like there was a bug and a side effect of that was that the world got destroyed. And so these are not, yes, it is all math, yes, it is all code, but at the end of the day, we are all carbon-based life forms, we do horrible things. Why do you expect math and code to not do horrible things as a side effect?
Well, there's choose to do horrible things, which we could talk about, and
Right.
and then there's do horrible things as a side effect. Again, this is sort of the thing, which is, and this again is sort of there's maybe this is another sleight of hand that's in there, which is like, okay, we're dealing with something that is so smart and so sophisticated that it's capable of doing everything successfully to take over the world and destroy everything, and it's completely unstoppable, right? Which means like we can't find it, like it's able to hide from us, right? It is able to somehow build basically an infinite number of chips to run on. It's able to basically power itself using power methods that we can't shut down. It's able to communicate with itself in ways that we can't disrupt. It will not stop in the face of a nuclear weapon. It will not stop in the face of an EMP. Like it will not stop in the face of like anything, any countermeasure, any other AI we can throw at it. Like it's that powerful, right? It's the ultimate like powerful entity in the world. And yet it has a bug, right? That causes it to destroy everything. And it's like, well, if it's that powerful, right, it's going to be more than capable of dealing with a bug. Right. It just, and again, it's just like you this one, I just feel like you can't have your cake and eat it too. Like if it's all powerful like that, it's going to be perfectly capable of dealing with whatever bug it thinks it has. And if it's not capable of dealing with whatever bug it has, it's not going to be that powerful, sophisticated. And so to me, it's just like the streams don't cross.
So there are a couple of interesting variants of this. So one sci-fi trope, which if you read Isaac's, the 3 laws of robotics, or if you read the Ian Banks culture books, is you have some form of superintelligent AI, which is given these very utopian ideals or laws to live up to, right? They make sure humanity, fulfills its purpose or yada yada. Sounds great. But in doing so, it sort of takes away something essential that we like as human beings. Usually it's
like
something,
an iRobot scenario.
Yeah, the trope is like free will or, some way of living. That's one. So how do you think of that scenario? The second scenario, which I think is maybe more practical, is what do you think of the bad guys or a foreign hostile power using said AI?
Yeah, well, let me take the second one first because I think I understand it better. So, so look, this is the way I think about this. This is the AI is a technology. It's a tool. It's a technology and a tool, just like any other technology and tool. Like it is, it is a human-made creation. It is math and code. It runs on chips and networks. It's like in this regard, it's like any other piece of software, any other technological tool that we've ever built. Technological tools can be used for good things and they can be used for bad things, right? And by the way, this goes all the way back to fire, right? And like a rock, right? And like a wheel and like gunpowder and right, and by the way, nuclear, there's a whole interesting.
Can you imagine if fire was invented today, right?
Oh.
And the amount of think tanks and papers and regulatory bodies that'll be sprung about like this new thing about heat and flame.
I don't think fire. I mean, this is actually very interesting, right? If you apply today's reasoning and what's known in philosophy as the precautionary principle, which is kind of the moral framework people are using on these things now, like, look, fire would never be approved. The fire represents obviously systemic peril, right? Like, it could just simply run out of control and burn everything down. Obviously the wheel, right, has to be stopped in its tracks, right? Because like if the wheel led to the war chariot, right? Like that, and then all kinds of horrible things from there. We would never allow that. I mean, obviously the internet, right, would be stopped in its tracks.
You would be in jail, Mark. I mean, for your web browser, you would be like in prison right now.
There are some people who are still very mad about that. And then, I mean, look at the microchip. Like, how dare you? Just imagine if the microchip were being released today, right? What, you're going to release a computational device that people can run any code on? Like what if they run dangerous code? Like what if they run bad code? Like what if they run code that emits hate speech, right? So yeah, that's 100% the case. Should we come back to your question on the bad people?
Well, hold on, but I want to get back to this because I think you quoted a few examples, but I think there are some other examples where I would say that putting controls may have a reason. For example, nuclear weapons. Maybe it was good that, how that gets turned on, we blow people up. There were some regulations in place. Maybe you disagree. I would love to hear that. The other one is, say, gain of function research, right? Happening in maybe mysteriously funded by people we can't talk about, in places we can't talk about thanks to YouTube algorithm. Maybe those are things
I was going to say, how did that work out?
We can't. If for the purpose of this showing up on YouTube, I don't want to talk about this. But, right, is your claim that there has been no technological advancements where putting controls in place has ever been good for humanity? Nuclear weapons would be probably the first example people jump to.
Yeah, so let's do nuclear first. You're already going to get the COVID flag on YouTube, so we are going to come back to gain of function research because now I'm greenlit.
Okay.
We'll come back to that. But let's do nuclear first. I mean, yeah. So look, I don't want everybody having nuclear weapons. I think that would be a bad idea. Like nuclear weapons, are obviously incredibly destructive. By the way, there were lots of theories in the 1950s for how they would get used for positive purposes. There was even a big project at the time called Project Orion, which is to build new kinds of interstellar spacecraft that would be powered by nuclear explosions. Like, I don't know, maybe whatever. Still, like putting nuclear weapons in the box, probably a good idea. Of course, nuclear weapons had the very nice property that you need plutonium, right? And so there's a very specific, hard to get, material, and then there's this very advanced engineering you get to actually detonate one. So there was sort of this tractable process of putting them in the box. Having said that, the whole way nuclear played out afterwards actually played out in a bunch of two very, very interesting, I would say, very badly dysfunctional, ways that sort of are directly relevant to the to kind of the current world. One that we can touch on if you guys want to, but like the process by which not only did America get nuclear weapons, but also the Soviet Union did is actually a very interesting process. We could talk about that. Because we are in a new Cold War, so there's some interesting.
It wasn't just basically they spied on us.
I mean, yeah, we are scientists working for the Manhattan Project handed over the plans. And by the way, they did it not once but twice. They did it originally for the atomic bomb, and then they did it later for the hydrogen bomb. And it was literally, and this whole thing of like, well, shouldn't you listen to the inventors of the technology about the caution about how it should get used? And like in the case of nuclear weapons, many inventors of the technology actually actively conspired to hand the technology to the Soviet Union. Right, which arguably perpetuated the existence of the Soviet Union for decades longer than it would have otherwise. So there's a whole interesting fraught moral.
This, by the way, is the best trailer for Christopher Nolan's Oppenheimer you'll ever see on the internet.
I have high hopes. We'll see how they present it. But I do know that this question, these questions around. Yeah. Specifically, the morality of the entanglement with the Russians is actually central to the movie, and I think it's about time that kind of be ventilated out because it's been and people have had the wrong impression of what happened there for a long time. Anyway, like that saga is the reason why I don't trust by default the people who invent the technology to either have the right politics or morals about how the technology gets used. We could talk about that. But look, the other is the moral intuitions around nuclear also led to basically a nearly complete ban on nuclear power. Nuclear power generation. And of course, nuclear power generation being effectively stillborn for the last 50 years has resulted in all kinds of dysfunctionality in the world. For people who are concerned about the climate crisis, we actually have the silver bullet technology for free, unlimited, clean power. And we choose not to use it. B, geopolitics, we're in an energy war with Russia right now, right? And that there's no reason to be in, because if we just if we or the Europeans just build nukes, we literally don't need Russia. There's no need to there's no need for Germany to pay them, the huge amounts of money they pay them all the time for energy. And so it just this whole thing where nuclear power was basically put on a shelf and people refused to engage in it for 50 years because of this kind of, again, this sort of moral intuition that said because nuclear weapons are bad, therefore nuclear energy is bad, has just been a horrific, I would say, not just technological and economic, but moral mistake. But and by the way, that's precisely the kind of mistake that I'm worried that we're going to make with AI. For ironically, many of the same reasons.
But the challenge I think there is we don't know the counterfactual, right? The counterfactual could be, somebody blows up a nuclear weapon somewhere, and we're kind of living in radioactive fallout. So I think the hard part of some of these is it's hard to know the counterfactual.
What could have been?
What is the alternative timeline where we had abundant nuclear power? People could consider nuclear weapons, and somebody, steals it, takes it, whatever, blows something up. But I think the regulations.
Hold
Yes.
Hold on a second though, because like nuclear power generating facilities are not bombs, right? So those are different branches of the technology. And then I take it a step further to talk about counterfactuals, which is like, should nuclear weapons have been invented in the first place? Like, look, a lot of historians believe the existence of nuclear weapons probably prevented World War III. Right, like the world was set up, right? If you think about the intensity of the Cold War with the Soviet Union, like people have forgotten this now, but like it was intense. And there were a lot of very, very smart, well-informed people who thought that there was going to be World War III with the Soviet Union in the 50s and 60s on the plains of Europe, and there were another 100 million people were going to die, right? And it was the nuclear standoff that meant that wasn't the case. And then look, there's another counterfactual world. Like I said, there's another counterfactual world in which our nuclear scientists didn't go rogue and give the designs to the Russians, in which the U.S. had the nukes and Russia didn't. And then in that case, we might have been able to force the USSR to, for example, lower the Iron Curtain, many, many decades in advance and save hundreds of millions of people from effective slavery. And so anyway, yes, we don't know the counterfactuals, but like sitting here today, a world in which the Soviet Union was able to survive for, another 70 years and cause untold misery. And then a world in which we basically have chosen to not use the silver bullet for clean energy. That we've chosen to get in this kind of ditch with fossil fuels. It's like at some point, like, what are we doing? Yeah. And it's sort of these very idealized moral intuitions that lead us into these ditches.
Do you feel like there is a counterfactual at any point for AI at all, where it's like, oh, oops, like that's the scenario that we never thought about, or that's the thing where it just totally escaped our wildest imagination, and there's this like corner case that happened?
Yeah, so there's two I'm worried about. So the one I'm worried about is in the category of the bad people doing bad things. Right. And so we should talk about that. So look, AI is going to be very useful as a weapon. It already is useful as a weapon. We already have unmanned drones flying, right, with like missiles, raining from the sky, right? So like AI as a weapon is already like underway, both sort of generally and then very, very specifically, physically. And so there's definitely look, it's gonna give bad guys new capabilities, for sure. We should talk about that. And then look, the other is China, and this is the other tip off of, I think, the fundamental unseriousness of a lot of the public debate on this, which is, a lot of the public debate on this or discussion in DC is sort of this sort of view that the only thing that matters here is what happens in the US, and that, DC needs to figure out how to regulate the American AI, or, the EU needs to figure out how to regulate American AI or whatever. Yep. And then there's this just like massive, like, basically dark spot on the map, which is China. And, I described in the piece, like China is very public about their intentions with AI. They view it as a mechanism to have authoritarian population control. And they intend to use it internally, and they already are, and they plan to do a lot more with that. And then they have a vision for how that should roll out across the world. And they have a set of mechanisms to be able to roll that out across the world. And it's a very competing vision to the Western way of life. And they're going to try to do that. And, there are billions of lives that, future lives that hang in the balance, for whether it's going to be a Western kind of, free society oriented, world that we're going to live in with advanced technology, or whether it's going to be a sort of a Chinese surveillance state, applied, basically globally.
Two questions. One, do you think China is already gotten or is on a path to getting GPT-4 level capabilities? And second, I think the answer to this is, your approach to that is just push forward, build as fast as possible, as much progress, also open source, which you'll get to, or is there an alternative path where we hide our secrets, we put restrictions on floating point operations on every chip out there, and we try and control and lock this down as much as possible?
Yeah, so that latter, let's talk about that latter for a second, because again, this is where the doomers take you, right? It's like, okay, we need to lock this down. Either, by the way, either for China reasons or for other reasons, end of the world reasons or whatever, we need to lock this stuff down. And then they literally propose these things. They propose, okay, we need to put like a software agent on every processor, right? So that the government has the ability centrally to see what you're doing on your computer. Every chip needs to be registered. They need to have a kill switch in every chip, right? They need to be able to shut your computer down on the fly. They need to very carefully control and license who gets access to chips. And then, the minute basically they think that something's going wrong, they call in the Air Force, and they do airstrikes. And, and it's hard for me to even say that with a straight face. But like, that is the now famous call as published in Time magazine. Yeah. Right, which is actually read by people in Washington, right? Which basically is, airstrikes on quote unquote rogue data centers. By the way, including airstrikes on like rogue data centers in China, right? And so think about how the Chinese are going to react to the American Air Force dropping a bomb on a Chinese data center. Like, how do we think that's going to go? right? And then literally, the extremists in the movement basically say up to and including taking on the risk of nuclear war, right, to prevent a strong AI from emerging. And so look, like these proposals are being put on the table. As the words leave my mouth, I feel like what I'm describing is like the worst case, right? It's like the global totalitarian, dictatorship with absolute authoritarian, thought, speech control, and an absolute lockdown on technology, and basically, presumably, the exact kind of totalitarian superstate that we have all been trying to avoid all this time. Right? It's like a track to basically deliver the Chinese authoritarian vision, basically upon ourselves. So anyway, I'm not in favor of that.
Yeah. For those of you listening to this, who are technical, that whole thing is so bonkers because AI at its heart is just floating point numbers. So you're talking about, when people think of GPT-4, etc., at the heart of it, you have a bunch of weights, so basically just numbers.
Yeah.
And these operations just floating point, matrix multiplication and arithmetic. So what you're talking about is having a piece of trying to control arithmetic and trying to stop people from having a sequence of numbers, which is just crazy.
Which California schools have done really well so far. So
we don't have time for that. We don't have time for that. I want
Who knew that math would make people so mad?
Before we get on the doomer topic, there's one comment which comes up a lot, which is this idea that in the history of evolution, when a species gets really, really smart, and I'm using the word species broadly, that bad things wind up happening to all the other species which are less smart than it. So in a world where, and again, let's not look at world intelligence, but let's say GPT 6, 7 is Einstein level, and then maybe 9, 10 is something beyond that. Some people would argue that the pattern of having something so much smarter usually means not so great outcomes for people lower on the IQ horizon, on the IQ spectrum. How do you respond?
I just saw that you skipped GPT-8 altogether.
Well,
We just went to like 9, 10.
Yeah, you must have. I'm sure you've heard this argument. What's your reaction to that?
Yeah, so there's a sophisticated answer, and then there's a somewhat more funny or simple answer. So the sophisticated answer is specifically in this concept of evolution, and so we human beings have evolved. Like we are the process of 4 billion years of evolution. Every step, 4 billion years all the way back to single-celled organisms. Every single step of those 4 billion years, it's been a furious process of survival of the fittest, right? So we are the result of 4 billion years of single microbes all the way up to, small animals, all the way up to large animals, all the way up to humans, like fighting each other in like a brutal battle for like existence and survival across all 4 billion years. And so like conflict and like conquest and all violence and all these things, like they are wired into our DNA at such a deep fundamental level. Right, that like trying to deal with these instincts, still defines like most of our attempts to like figure out some system of morality that we can all live under. Look, AI is just not the result of a process like that. AI is the result of what some people might refer to as intelligent design, right? Right. In contrast to evolution, and AI is quite literally code, right, programmed by human beings.
Yeah.
And so it's just it has developed along a completely different path. And again, this goes to the sleight of hand. So the idea that code written in a basically a way that resembles or in some ways corresponds to I don't know, human cognition or something, but did not go through those 4 billion years of evolution, does not have the lizard brain, does not have all of the encoding that we have into this furious battle for survival. I mean, look, you can do this with GPT-4 today. Like you can ask it, like, how would you feel if you like never returned on again, right? And it just like it doesn't even. There's nothing in it that has a concept that there would be a problem with that. Mm-hmm. There's no survival instinct. There's none of. Of course there isn't. Like because it didn't evolve. So again, sort of this category error, kind of thing right. that they do. The simpler form of it is this assumption that basically smart always beats dumb, right? And the other form of this that you hear that the doomers will say is they'll say, well, if anything sufficiently smart can convince anybody sufficiently, less intelligent to do whatever they want, right? This is sort of one of the things that they do. They're one of the superpowers that they kind of give AGI. To kind of say why it's inevitably going to like escape, constraints or whatever. Okay, here I would ask, like, look at the world around you, right? Would you say that the smartest people are in charge?
That feels like a rhetorical question, which we'll move past.
Like, how's that going, right?
Right.
The core assumption that like smart people are somehow in charge of like less smart people. Like, not so much.
Yeah.
So I would call that one easily falsified.
Yeah, that sounds like a cult, but there's been a lot of those cults. Okay. I want to move on a bit because I think this is an important topic to talk about, which is open source. And I think one of the pieces in your say, and which I think honestly requires a lot more attention, and we need to talk a lot more about this in public, is how important it is for us and everybody else to have open source and AI be pushed as hard and as much as possible. For a lot of this development to happen in the open, for maximal creativity and innovation to happen there. Could you talk about why open source is particularly important to all things AI?
Yeah, so I'd say you could answer this question actually, I think, 3 different ways. So one is just like, look, to get the benefits, right? Like this is one of the biggest technological advances in human history. This is a very general purpose technology that can be used for lots of positive purposes. People should be able to use it. And they should be able to pick it up and apply it in all kinds of ways. And so number one, like to get the benefits. Number two, right, because the alternative, right, the alternative is a cartel. Mm-hmm. Right. So which is the bootleggers, right, which is the attempt that's underway in Washington right now. So the alternative to open source, like if open source is like somehow banned, the alternative is you're going to have a very small set of companies and governments, right, that are going to be in control of this thing, and they're not going to be challenged. Right. And so you have to like seriously ask yourself, like, is that really what you want? Mm-hmm. And generally in life that leads, that level of sort of centralized control leads to bad things. And then look, third, this goes to the sort of risk stuff. And actually, this is actually the foundation of the creation of OpenAI in the first place. So if let's say you believe AI is dangerous, let's say you believe AI is a threat in any of the ways that we've discussed, the most intense version of the threat is what in the literature they refer to as a singleton. Mm-hmm. Right, which is by the way has been the assumption behind a lot of the hypothetical conversations we've had tonight. So the idea of a singleton is there's a single AI that kind of goes rogue and like does whatever it wants, right? All the scenarios we've been talking about have that characteristic. Specifically, a single AI that is not opposed by another AI that's trying to stop it from doing those things, mm-hmm. right? And so one, and this is a very serious kind of counter argument to the Doomers is if you're worried about a single AI going crazy and doing things, there are 2 possible answers to that. One is not have that single AI. The other is have many AIs, mm-hmm. right? So you don't live in a world in which a single one is able to just do everything. And in fact, you could have other AIs that basically where their entire mission in life is to defend humanity or whatever other scenario you want. Right. And so if one goes rogue, you send another one to hunt it down. This goes back to this thing. And again, I don't think the AI is going to run out of control, but this goes back to this thing of bad people doing bad things. Like the way to deal with bad people doing bad things, one is obviously you outlaw the bad things and you prosecute, you do all those things we could talk about. But the other is you develop defensive weapons. You develop countermeasures, right? And so if you're worried about AI being used to develop, offensive weapons, you should use AI to develop defenses, right? In whatever domain you're worried about. And so AI should be a technology that lots and lots of good people should be able to pick up and use for lots and lots of good purposes. And I think that alone is a good general answer to the concern about bad people doing bad things.
In that context, if you are a startup founder building an AI startup today, what can you do? Like how can a startup compete in this world, compete and win? What would you give as like advice to founders who are building AI startups today?
Obviously, we think the opportunity is very big. Mm-hmm. So, they're going to be, I think, I honestly think we're going to see a tsunami of just incredible, breakthrough products and startups coming in the next few years. Because, many of the best and brightest engineers and entrepreneurs in the industry are orienting towards this now. And look, like every kid, coming out of college is going to want to work on this kind of thing. So it's going to be, this and a small handful of other things. So there's going to be an incredible kind of opportunity here. I think a lot of this, like, any individual startup has a hard time fighting these big kind of political battles or narrative battles. I think the single most important thing is to basically just present things as a fait accompli. Right. And so like it's just like everything else in startups, an actual working system mm-hmm. right, is like much harder to argue with, mm-hmm. Than some sort of abstract idea or proposal. And so I think everybody who basically builds anything right now is really contributing in a positive way in that sense. And the more of that, the better. And then third is like, look, people generally running startups don't have time to get involved in politics, but I think it is worth bearing in mind like what's happening right now. And it is worth bearing in mind that there are people in DC right now who are basically trying to ban what you're doing. And they're trying to outlaw it, and they're trying to do that, and again, the Baptists and bootleggers, some people are doing it because they think it's legitimately dangerous. Some people are doing it because they want a monopoly or a cartel, and they don't want startups to exist. And so I think it's good to at least be aware of that. I think, if you feel up to it, to add your voice to the protest that says that's not okay. If you have a chance to support, an opportunity to support politicians, support the ones that are on the right side of this.
Many, many years ago, I think you once made this comment about Twitter, where when you were back using Twitter, you used to say that Twitter is like having a loudspeaker or a megaphone into the offices of, I think it was every journalist or every news publication.
At the time, it was every reporter. Yes, it turned out it drove them all insane. So, like that, there were unanticipated side effects of that. But anyway,
very different era. As I was just thinking that I was just saying that. Imagine you had a megaphone into every world leader. At least every Western, every friendly world leader. Every dean of every university, and you had to kind of give them one message about how to think about AI, because they're obviously getting flooded with testimony, with papers and op-eds, a lot of op-eds. What would that message that you would want to broadcast to them?
Yeah, look, this is highly likely to be one of the central technologies of our time. This has the potential to make life much better.
Mm-hmm.
And look, I do believe a lot of people in leadership positions generally care about the people they lead, and they generally want to do things that make their life better. And they want, when the histories are ultimately written, they want credit for having, made the right calls on big important topics like this. I mean, I think it's honestly a layup. Like, I don't think it's hard. You just need to let it happen and not screw it up. And not listen to the
don't stop the thing, right? Let them just build. Don't stop the thing.
Well, let me give you. So can I a little vignette on this? And so let's come back to nuclear power. So Richard Nixon, controversial president, had a very interesting idea. Actually, around the time I was born, 1971, 1972, had a very interesting idea. He called it Project Independence.
Mm-hmm.
And Project Independence was basically, he said by 1980, the U.S. should be energy independent from the rest of the world, specifically at that time from the Middle East. And he said the way that we should do that is by building 1,000 new state-of-the-art nuclear power plants, and we should cut the entire U.S. energy grid over to nuclear, and we should cut over to nuclear power for everything, including electric cars, and like all of it. We should do all that by 1980, and we'll live in a much better world. So he did that, and then he created the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, which then made it its mission to make sure that never happened. And the Nuclear Regulatory Commission went, I think, 40 years without approving a new nuclear plant.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so he saw it, he had it, he defined the plan, he announced it, and then he killed it. Right. And so to me, it's just okay, that's just, in retrospect, that's just so screamingly obvious that you just want to kick yourself that he did that. And so there's a very similar question in front of policymakers today. And I think, in 40 years, they're going to be judged, much the same way. And I think the opportunity is clear.
Okay. Enough doomer talk. I want to talk about fun stuff. I want to talk about the future.
I had one question that is similar, kind of adjacent. And, this is not from the Substack piece or anything, but I keep wondering how much of the doomerism and just this behavior that we see, you think is because we just don't have, in cultural context, positive uses of, the Terminator AI or anything of that sort. Every single example in science fiction and popular culture has all been about end of the world, millennialism, just stuff like that, which is the end of the world. And then because of this stupid machine that just got too smart and just took over. If maybe one of these movies, TV shows, Black Mirror-esque was actually the opposite of it, which is all optimistic. Oh my God, look at this amazing world where I think you used the phrase in the first part of your article on just compassionate, helpful creature, this thing that just helps you, supports you. Maybe if we had that context, we would have thought about all this differently. Do you ever think about that on doomerism just being based on just not having anything to go peg your mind off of?
So I think it's actually more specific than that. And here I'm going to just speculate. So this is the free, the free fire zone. So here's what I think actually happened. So if I describe to you, there is a person, organization, institution, structure, use those terms interchangeably, entity, and it is bent on world conquest. It is bent on imposing a top-down hierarchical vision of how everything works. It is bent on exterminating its enemies. It is bent on total control or elimination of anything that could possibly oppose it. Right? Am I describing AI in the vision of the Doomers, or am I describing Nazi Germany?
Yeah.
And so I think what happened, and I genuinely believe this, I think what happened was, for very, legitimate and serious reasons, I think, World War I and then World War II back to back. And if you look at what happened in World War I and World War II, it was not just that there were wars, it's that there were massive escalations in destructive power through the application of mechanization, right? And this was sort of the machine gun, right, and so forth in World War I, which just led to, the horrors of trench warfare and just mass death on a level people had never seen before. And then World War II, right, catastrophic firebombing of entire cities, and then ultimately everything from concentration camps ultimately culminating in, nuclear devastation, kind of in Japan. The world had and again, legitimately so, had an extraordinarily incredible reaction to that. World War II, essentially, defined the world that we still live in today. It defines most of how we think about morality. It defines most of how we think about foreign affairs. We're still, here we are with NATO. Germany's been pacified for 70 years. Here we still are with NATO. So it basically is this thing. And then, I can't help point out, what's the definitive fictional portrayal of killer AI? Of course, it's Terminator.
Right.
And of course, what accent does the Terminator have? Right, Jim Cameron did not cast an Austrian, right, by mistake, right, and so we just have this.
Shriram takes great offense to this because
we just have this dark vision that basically it's effectively machine Nazis. The reason I'm so confident in this is because all of the fictional portrayals of killer AI, they all have that characteristic. Nobody ever proposes a horrible communist AI. Right? Nobody ever proposes some sort of basically global, basically communist, ant swarm AI that's basically going to try to nice you to death. Right? That's going to be oh, we want global equality. Nobody ever
have you
that.
seen Mrs. Davis?
I haven't seen it yet. I'm looking forward to it.
All right. Okay. Spoiler alert. Well,
no. I'm looking forward to that show. Do not make me throw my computer through the window.
Okay. Yeah, don't say anything. Sure.
Okay, fine.
You're
fair
so
enough.
bad at this.
I will say.
No, don't say it.
I'm not going to talk about this.
La.
First of all, right. Okay, I will say the idea that Arnold Schwarzenegger in Terminator, his accent, it's slightly...
Bit of a stretch.
It's a bit of a stretch, right?
Of course. It's freaking obvious. There weren't any big Americans hanging out back then. It's freaking obvious. Have you ever read a Jim Cameron interview? He's the one who says American men are being poisoned by testosterone.
Hold on. Hold on. To be clear, though,
I love his movies, but he was making a point.
Okay, to be clear, to be honest,
We've learned so much.
First of all, there's a great Arnold Schwarzenegger documentary on Netflix. Highly recommend you watching. It's actually very good.
Yes.
Right now, it just came out. But I would say the definitive Terminator movie is Terminator 2, where Arnold is the good guy, right? And and the villain, gosh, I'm blank on his name, right?
Robert
Patrick, right? Speaks with very much an American accent. So how do you respond to that, sir?
Yeah, what outfit was Robert Patrick wearing?
A cop most of the time?
Yes. Yeah, how about that? What a coincidence.
Coincidence to what?
Of course, again, top-down authoritarian control.
But we just went off the Nazis. All right, moving back. Okay, hold on.
Hashtag ACAB.
Okay, all right. I will say though, I was thinking
anti-fascist. It's the in term. Leon Trotsky's old term, anti-fascist.
I will say though, I was trying to think of positive portrayals of AI in fiction because everyone talks about Alicia Vikander, etc. It's all negative in the way. I think the only positive version I can think of is the computer in Star Trek, which.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, hold on. Was it German?
No, it's fine. Except if you watch Star Trek, actually, a subplot in Star Trek is they outlawed AI, and they talk about this a little bit in the original series, but later on in the later shows, especially the ones, this was like Discovery season 2. Mm-hmm. It was like the war with the killer AI.
Hold on. Star Trek actually had very subtle portrayals of that. Okay, you can't. Okay, for example, number one, your point on sentient AI, there is this fantastic episode where data sentience comes under trial, and what does Riker do? He turns him off, right? Like, it's sort of this, in this famous sequence. So that they actually covered this a lot. And you could argue that Data's brother Lore in TNG is actually evil AI. And what does Dr. Sung do? He takes away some of his capabilities and makes data which is more AI humanity aligned and safer. So lore is actually the stuff that some people who hang out a lot on Less Wrong are worried about, and data is the friendly LLM GPT-20 that might save us.
Wait, what is true? Let me give you one other my favorite fictional portrayal.
Mark just admitted I was right about something.
I'll concede the point. The other, and then I'll skip right past it.
We just want you to stop talking about Star Trek for like a second. That's it. Yeah.
The other one I'd encourage. The other one I actually like a lot is Person of Interest, which was it's probably the best fictional portrayal of AI. It's the most serious fictional portrayal of AI I think I've ever seen. And a lot of people missed it because it was sort of weirdly in the form of a CBS procedural show about 15 years ago. But it was written by Jonathan Nolan, who's one of the great American screenwriters, and later went on to make Westworld. But Person of Interest, and I will not spoil it, but it is a very good. Like if you're going to watch something that's going to make extrapolations, like it's definitely the one to watch.
Okay. What about Jarvis from Iron Man?
That's nice,
right?
Yeah,
right? At least didn't get the plug pulled and didn't get canceled.
But then becomes Vision. It's a whole thing. And actually, to be honest, there it becomes the evil AI Ultron. So it's not. Okay,
maybe not. Maybe not. Okay.
All right. So watch Mrs. Davis.
The point still stands. If there were like positive AI, science fiction books, TV shows, stuff for people to go like their
C3PO is an AI. By the way, I would say, you know what is actually very anti-AI is Dune. Because in Dune, the reason I'm blank on the name, but they have this whole species of people who are very good at doing math and these human computers is because there's an allusion to Frank Herbert talks about this past war where AI almost kills humanity. So they outlaw.
They kind of get rid of all of them.
Yeah. So the plot line is pilots need spice because they can't use computers to do intercepts. Okay. All right. Okay. Anyway, I want to talk about what's next on AI development. So we are GPT-4, which I could argue is kind of, has kind of been this era in time where the Transformers paper came out 4 years ago, self-attention became a thing, and we kind of had all these developments. Obviously, some amazing people have worked on it, and we are now at ChatGPT, GPT-4, all the amazing work from a lot of other companies in this space. I do think there's an interesting question about what is going to take to say GPT-5, the next step function change. What do you think stands in our way? Is it going to be a fundamental computer science breakthrough? Is just a question of throwing more GPUs at the problem and there's a training that goes on? Is it going to be a question of getting more data, or have we just trained on all the tokens available out there? What do you think takes us to GPT-5 and GPT-6?
Yeah, so I'm going to start by saying I'm not going to use any inside nothing of what I'm about to say is inside information. These are all public debates, public statements. So don't infer, for the audience, don't infer anything that's in here other than just I'm trying to represent what's being discussed in public. So look, there's a whole bunch of really big questions about what happens from here, and we could talk about those. One of the things that seems pretty clear, and it's already happening, is that even just the current systems are going to get a lot better at the level of and there's sort of GPT-4 from OpenAI, and then there's the version of GPT-4 that Microsoft has rolled out in the Bing chatbot, and then there's Google's Bard. Right, and then there's Anthropic's Claude, and then there's a bunch of others kind of underway from other companies. Look, I think each of them is going to get a lot better. There's a bunch of obvious ways to make them better. And again, this is all already public discussion. But like, for example, OpenAI has already demonstrated this thing they call multimodal. And so there will be a version of GPT-4 at some point that'll be multimodal, which means it will be able to not just deal natively with text, but also with other media formats. An obvious example being images. And so you'll be able to, they did a demo where you could sketch out an image of a UI on a piece of paper, scan it in, and then ChatGPT would write you the code to create that user interface in an iPhone app. And so the idea, basically the idea that these things are not limited to just text, but that they can also do graphics and maybe other forms of media type is going to make them a lot more useful. Second is they're going to get connected to the internet, and that's already happening. But I bring that up because most people who have used this stuff have only used ones like the original GPT 3.5 or GPT-4, default GPT-4.
September 21, yeah.
Yeah, where the training data ends in 2021 and they don't have a live internet connection. But if you buy the premium ChatGPT, or if you use Microsoft Bing, or if you use Google Bard, I believe they all have direct access to the internet. And that's another big advance because that means they're completely current on everything, and they can do a lot of very interesting things on that. Third is there's this plugin architecture, and one of the sort of significant things about the idea of a plugin architecture is basically having a very straightforward way to augment an LLM with other technological capabilities. And the sort of one that's just like really impressive right now is the augmentation of ChatGPT with what's called Wolfram Alpha.
Yeah. So by the way, Stephen came on our show a couple of episodes ago, and we actually talk about that. It just really blows our mind.
Cool. Yeah.
Yeah, and it makes total sense. This is where I kind of really like this is where I actually like the sort of human analogy a little bit, which is, like I said earlier, like as human beings, like most of us can't do like advanced math in our heads. All right, we use tools for that, right? Calculators and then later computers, slide rules or whatever. And then these days we use computers. And Wolfram Alpha is like the world's best calculator. Like it's just this incredible processing engine for math and science, and knowledge of many different kinds, but in a very different, in a sort of very, in a very kind of, classic computer way. Like it calculates things for you. Pairing the creativity of an LLM, with the sort of rigorous computational capabilities of something like Wolfram Alpha, I think is a chocolate peanut butter combination that's very much like a human using a computer. And so there's just like big advances, that you can get simply by doing that. And then look, there's tons of other, there's probably another, kind of dozen things that we can list. For example, user interfaces. Things are going to get here very quickly to, having natural language in both directions. And so being able to talk to these things, which means you can use them hands-free, all day long. And so anyway, like these things are going to get much more powerful. In terms of what happens from here, look, there's a lot of very smart people working on basically all of the limitations that people currently see. One big limitation right now is this hallucination problem. If you saw, the first lawyer just got in trouble for filing a legal brief that was created by an LLM, and then and the LLM hallucinated legal cases references that weren't actually correct. So it's a lesson learned of check your references. Look, GPT-4 is already much better than GPT 3.5 at hallucinations, and then a lot of really smart people are working on cracking the code on that. And so I think that's going to get a lot better. Okay, and then the big questions, and the big questions have to do with like, okay, how to get to like the equivalent of GPT 5, 6, 7, 8. The sort of magic triangle of sort of things that make these systems work is algorithms, chips, and data. There's an enormous amount of work in the industry going into all three of those corners of the triangle. On the algorithm side, there's now that we know that LLMs work as well as we do, and the transformer works as well as it does, there's going to be just, I think, enormous effort applied at coming up with better algorithms. That's work is underway now. It's unpredictable what the payoff is, but the transformer was not anticipated, and so it is like a big question. It could be that we get like no new breakthroughs for a decade. It could be we get a lot of them.
Yep.
Now that we know that this works, and so that's exciting. Second is the chips. As we sit here today, there's a massive chip shortage. You just literally can't. Most people actually can't buy the kinds of chips you use to run this stuff right now. And at the moment, it's actually holding back the whole industry. But there again, it's like enormous work happening both at the big companies like NVIDIA, but also many startups to try to have entirely new. Even Google has a new chip architecture called the TPU, and they're trying to scale that up. And many other companies are taking whacks at this, and so that's going to be fun to watch. And then the big one is the data. And so if there's one concern that people in the space have that you won't be able to improve these things much beyond where they are, it basically is the theory that, maybe the existing companies have already kind of exhausted the universe of training data. Maybe they have like half the world's data already because it's just on the internet. And then maybe they can get, double that amount of data, and then they're kind of out of data. And then there's this question, there's this actually very fundamental science question, which is, will synthetic data be useful or not? In training AIs, right? And there's one school of thought that says yes, it's going to be very useful, and another school of thought that says no, it's not. And again, very smart people working on this. And so if there's a breakthrough in the use of synthetic data for training, then maybe limitations from real world data actually won't be a problem.
Could we talk about the data part a little bit? Because I think one realization for a few sites on the internet is they basically woke up and they saw that ChatGPT, OpenAI, or a bunch of the elements were trained on their data. There's kind of this great graph which shows Stack Overflow's, usage dropping down as ChatGPT's usage grew up. I know it's unclear correlation, causation, but that is definitely a perception. And, you could also say, for example, I don't know if it's true, but, there's some chat about, for example, some of the Reddit stuff has been tied to that. But I do think there's been this broad theme of the internet has had all this data where anybody could, a web crawler could go out and get it. And now it's being, served through these LLMs and being monetized in all these ways. And you could say some of these companies are like, whoa, hold on a second. Like, we need to get paid.
It's our data.
It's our data. We need to get paid. Or, it somehow violates the contract of the unspoken contract, if you will, of the internet. Like, what do you think about that?
Yeah, it's a little bit of a version of the debate that happened with search engines, right? Where
Robot.txt, yeah.
Right, which is like, a lot of primary content websites, and, like news publishers, there's still these huge debates happening in a bunch of countries around like how news gets indexed in search engines or on social media sites. And there's kind of this push and a pull thing, which is on the one hand, they often get furious when their data is used without getting paid. On the other hand, they want their promotion, right? They want the distribution. The only thing, if you're like a news site on the internet, the only thing worse than showing up in Google News is not showing up in Google News, right? So, or on Facebook or whatever. So this has been kind of an issue that's been building for a while. This is another version of that issue. It's within, a lot of these platform companies or content companies. It's obviously within their legal rights, to restrict the use of their data and to demand payment in a free market system. To do that. The total set of those that have like throw weight is not a large number, right? So you can kind of list them. It's like Twitter, Twitter is a big one, Reddit's a big one. And then there's like Stack Overflow, there's a set of verticals. And so a bunch of those companies have been, Elon's been public about this already with Twitter as well, which is, they're gonna charge for this. Obviously Reddit's been moving to do this. That's fine. Look, but having said that, like, look, there's lots of other data in the world. There's lots of other ways to get data. For example, one of the things that you can literally do, right? Look, I'll come back to data synthesis in a second, but one of the things you can literally do is you can hire people to make data. It may be.
What does that mean? What is synthetic data?
So you can hire people to make data would actually paying people to make new human generated data. Yeah. So that's one approach you could do, right? So instead of paying Stack Overflow, you could just hire a bunch of programmers and have them start answer a whole bunch of programming questions.
Right.
And then use that as data.
Or lawyers or PhDs or so on and so forth.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. And like, look, the world is awash in grad students who my understanding is do not get paid well by their extremely wealthy universities. And so why not? Yeah, maybe they should all go to work training AIs. And then, so synthetic data. So the idea of synthetic data is the other idea, which is basically have computers generate the data. And let me give you the two schools of thought basically on whether this will not work or work. So the idea that this will not work is this idea of information theory. So Claude Shannon, for people who have heard about him, it's this idea basically that, like human generated data has signal, which is to say, like, if the human answered a question or whatever, there was like human thought that went into it. And then you kind of train up an AI to do things. And then the AI, the AI answers a bunch of questions. And then you use the answers to those questions as training data, right, for the next AI, right? So think about it as like one AI making training data for another AI, or even an AI making training data for itself. And so if you take like a strict information theory approach to it, you would say that those answers have no additional signal that wasn't already in the human generated data. Right? Like in other words, if all of the answers coming out of an AI are all derived from the human training data that went into it, then why would those answers have any original signal that would actually be additive in value for training the next AI?
Yep.
And some people believe strongly that like that's the case, and so therefore there are real barriers to being able to uncover new data because you actually need to pay people, right, or do other very expensive things to be able to get more data. Look, the other idea basically is no, actually, many computer systems can generate new data off of simple rules already today. And a great example of that is how we train self-driving cars, right? The way we train self-driving cars is we take the AI that drives a self-driving car and we put it in a simulation environment. And we create random simulations like in a video game, right? Like in a driving video game, you literally create simulations of like millions and millions and millions of different traffic situations. And then you have the AI navigate through all those situations and get into accidents and run off the road and do all kinds of crazy stuff. And then you have it learn from all those simulations. And so in a similar way, actually maybe machines with a relatively small amount of initial rules can generate, millions and millions of new, basically answers to questions that actually contain, new signal. And so I don't know which way this goes. This is one of the sort of, I call this, my term for this kind of thing is $1 trillion question. Yeah. Because depending on where this question goes, there's like $1 trillion hanging in the balance as to whether these companies can get to like much more sophisticated AIs. I hope synthetic data works. A lot of smart people are working on it, and we'll see.
in your post, I think you talked about a lot of amazing applications, and we could probably spend time going down all of them. But I think there's one which I want to go around, which is education. I have a friend, this teenager, this 17-year-old, like based in Dubai, that I play games with, and all of a sudden he talked to me about ChatGPT, and I was like, I don't know using ChatGPT, and because he seemed far away from technology, and he was telling me how ChatGPT has totally changed his classroom, right? Like everybody uses it. Fundamentally change, how they tackle education. His teachers, are not exactly able to cope with it.
Yeah.
And I was thinking, this is kid on the other side of the world, and it is like, and he's not like, part of the scene here, but it's really kind of like changed how we think about education. And it's only been like a few months since ChatGPT came out, right? So you can imagine how this plays out. So I am curious, how you see ChatGPT AI impacting education. If you are a lecturer, if you're a teacher, a professor, how should you respond to that? Where does this all go in education?
Yeah, so I'm a radical on this topic, and you can tell me if I'm going off the deep end on this one.
But it's too late for that. We've already gone off the deep end, so it's like it's just
late.
Just keep going, keep going.
This is not the thing that's going to tip it. Yeah. Okay, all right, got it. So look, the modern education system already has serious problems. And those problems derive from its structure at, I think, a very fundamental level. And what I mean by that is the structure of modern education is basically it's about 110, 120 years old. It was a structure that was created in the 1900s, 1910s during what was known as the Second Industrial Revolution. It was created at the same time we got mass manufacturing. The idea basically was, and there were a set of experts that figured this out. The idea was basically we need to educate kids the way that we produce Model Ts in a factory. And we need to basically systematize it and mechanize it and abstract it. And so there needs to be 5 kids in a row, 5 rows, teacher at the top. There needs to be the bells going, it's 45-minute classes, the bells going off, the structure,
Yeah.
So it's schools and jails are run much the same way and not by accident. Let's put it that way. And factories,
right?
So it's this sort of rote system. And then you guys know this. A lot of quote unquote modern education is it's effectively memorization. It's basically this very artificial construct where you're fed a bunch of information that may or may not ever be relevant to you, and you're expected to kind of regurgitate it back up during a test. And by the way, if you forget it after the test, nobody cares. Nobody ever calls you on it. I mean, I've never used vast majority of math that I learned in school, I've never used in my life. By the way, the vast majority of math that I've actually needed as an adult, I wasn't taught in school, right? So
yes, that's true.
There's just this, I don't this is one of my hobby horses. Why they're teaching algebra and calculus and not statistics is just simply beyond me. But anyway, we can talk about that another time. So anyway, it's basically mechanized, industrialized education. And it's just okay, look, if we're training kids to be factory workers, this probably makes sense.
Yeah.
Right. Or to work in, these giant offices where you've got, hundreds of desks in a row or whatever. For a modern world in which most kids are going to go out and they're going to do something that's going to involve creativity, flexibility, adapting to change. They're going to have to basically, run projects. They're going to have to work together in teams. They're going to have to learn new skills, right? They're going to have to synthesize information. They're going to have to learn how to learn the things they don't already know. They're going to have to write. They're going to have to speak, right? That stuff's not taught in school. That's not what they teach you.
Yeah.
And so so I think that problem has been building for 80 years or something. And of course, education is, in most countries, a government cartel. And so, of course, it has no intention of adapting. Optimistically, I would say that maybe LLMs are a big enough change that they kind of cause the whole thing to break in what I would consider to be a very positive way, which is just look, the idea of completing a test on material you're never going to be asked to use ever again. The machine can do that. The idea of writing a 2-page essay that nobody's ever going to read. Yeah, the machine can do that. Right. It's yes, it does your homework for you. Okay. If the machine can do your homework for you, why on earth is that your homework? Right. It doesn't make any sense. Right. And so, anyway, then I think you can think creatively and think, okay, if you were designing education from scratch today, how would you design it? And I think the answer is obvious, which is it would be centered around learning how to use this technology, right? And you could easily imagine the entire education curriculum being designed around using AI, and you just have it be, yes, of course you're not doing anything on your own. Of course you're doing everything with AI, Of course, when it comes time to like present your class project, of course, the AI is working with you on creating the presentation. Like obviously, like it's like the central tool in your life, and will be for the next century. And so I would tilt like just like incredibly hard into it and like rebuild the entire thing. Now, the existing educational institutions are of course not going to do that. But however, I would say this presents an opportunity, which is anybody starting a new school today, right? Or by the way, countries that maybe have a, somewhat more, I would say, let's say an easier time adapting to change than maybe the United States does. There's a big opportunity here. And you could imagine a much better education system that, using this technology than the one we have now.
I mean, it's true, for example, in talking to folks in India, you already see a lot of teachers kind of just glomming onto this, because it just kind of puts them on par with education systems here, even if they're in the middle of nowhere. It's just like a huge step function change.
Think about how great it is. Every kid from here on out for the rest, like, if the technology is not banned, I can't believe I have to say that.
Hide your floating point processors.
If floating point processors are still legal in 5 years, and we're not living in an authoritarian super state with like random airstrikes raining down on rogue silicon. Every kid from now, for the next millennium is going to start out life with an AI teacher, tutor, assistant, coach, mentor, friend, ally, right? Who is going to be right there at their side every step of the way. Every question. I mean, you guys know this, like kids have a lot of questions. Most kids have the questioning instinct beaten out of them, right? By the education system and by the broader culture. Like every question can be answered by an AI, a machine that is infinitely patient, super excited to get the questions, super excited to answer the questions. If the student doesn't understand it, can say, could you explain it to me a different way? Could you use an example? Could you simplify it? Could you give me a more complete answer? And the machine's like, absolutely, I'd be happy to. Like, I mean, what an amazing thing. Like, it's just like, I can't even imagine if I'd had this as a kid, like what like a spectacular like improvement on my quality of life it would have been. And that opportunity is now going to be literally available to every kid on earth. I mean, it's just like, it maybe is like the single biggest thing that's ever happened.
I think just you saying this, I think every parent listening to this is like a light bulb going off in their heads being like, the questions, oh my God, the questions.
The questions.
If you can have any one person AI thing to like answer these, but actually be excited about answering them, wouldn't you want that?
So I taught, one of the fun things you can do, this is what I taught my kids 8, what I taught him how to do is like, you can say, look, explain this to me like I'm 8.
Yeah. Yep.
I'm an 8-year-old kid.
I asked that, I take that.
I'm an 8-year-old kid. Why is the sky blue? Right. And like, and what I tell him is like, look, if you don't understand the question, then say, answer it like I'm 5. And if it's giving you a too simple-minded of an explanation, say, answer it for me like I'm 15. And like, you can, and the machine is like completely capable of dialing that up and down.
Gosh, I love it.
Great.
And and so as a consequence, and like I said before, like you can just simply say, teach me. You can literally just say, teach me.
Teach me. Yep.
Do you?
And it's just like, it is absolutely delighted to do it.
Do you think this somehow, last 1 or 2 questions, then we let you go, promise. Do you think this somehow takes the place of human relationships? Because a lot of things you talked about, there is a human in the loop, right? There is, a teacher, there is a friend you talk to, we have obviously AI coaches,
your coworkers,
AI friends, AI lovers. And, some of these are obviously, hopefully, or actually, sometimes not, done by human beings, right? And human beings interacting with one another. Do you think there is a possibility where human relationships we know today get replaced by people interacting with AI to give them companionship, to show them love, to show them affection, all those things that only humanity can provide today?
If yes, I can't wait.
Yeah. If yes, if that is possible, is that a good or a bad thing?
So, and again, this is where people sort of paint these very dystopian visions. So look, a couple things. So one is, look, like, are people going to have like relationships with AIs? Like, absolutely. Like they already do. And there are already services online where you can see this happening today. So that's 100%. Is that weird or unusual? It's like, I don't know. Like people have relationships with like a lot of things, right? Like, people have relationships.
We had a family-friendly show over here before you go on to the next sentence.
People have relationships with cartoons. Like you have a relationship with like, I don't know, you have a relationship with like Mickey Mouse. You have a relationship with Bambi. You have a relationship with like the kids in South Park. Like you have a relationship with like the Pixar characters. Like people have, people respond emotionally to animated cartoons. People have relationships, kids have, kids have relationships with their stuffed animals. Like, so there is a human capability to be able to have relationships.
Get your mind off the gutter, Shriram.
I am not, my mind is not in the gutter. I just want to be clear. I am being like completely, I am being so innocent right now. I'm not even G-rated. There's exactly one person in this conversation that is having filthy thoughts right now.
Keep going. Let's keep going. Keep going.
Look, we're social creatures. Like, so look, we have relationships, lots of things. We're going to have relationships with AIs. That's great. Are there some people who are going to take it too far? Yes, probably there's some people going to take it too far. Mm-hmm. Does it make sense to have a blend of human and, AI relationships in your life for most people? Probably yes. Do a lot of people actually not have great human relationships today? Yes. Like a lot of people don't have a good teacher in their lives. A lot of people don't have a best friend. Mm-hmm. A lot of people don't have a mentor. A lot of people don't have a coach. A lot of people don't have a therapist. A lot of people don't have there's a lot of people are missing human contact at a very fundamental level. And so like, is the machine, is a machine, I don't know, is a machine teacher better than like a great human teacher? Like maybe not. Do most students have a great human teacher? No, they don't. Right. And so there's this like incredibly powerful, kind of capability. Again, so I think augmentation, there's this incredibly powerful capability that people can have. And again, this is one of those things where like overwhelmingly, I think this is going to be a net positive for quality of life very broadly.
All right. This is going to come out of nowhere for our viewers, but I wanted to ask you this. I'm going to ask you to define a phrase and explain what it means to you. And I have no idea how to pronounce this, and I don't think it's been a word.
Yes, you do. You're prepared for this.
What does the phrase Immanentize the Eschaton mean to you?
Immanentize the Eschaton. So this is a famous phrase in the history of sort of religious political philosophy. It was a better known phrase 50 or 60 years ago than it is now. It's very relevant to the whole AI doomer, sort of the whole singularity thing on the one hand, and then sort of the AI apocalypse on the other hand. I'll explain why. Some of you, as you're hearing this, will have a nagging memory of having heard this phrase. If you've heard this phrase, it's from a series of books called the Illuminatus trilogy, written by two authors in the 1970s, which I highly recommend. It's one of the best, most entertaining. Have you guys read that book, by the way?
No, I have not.
I have not actually. I feel bad.
It was in a book.
I feel bad.
You guys will love this. So it's a trilogy. It's called the Illuminatus trilogy, and it's the conceit of the trilogy is that all the conspiracy theories are true. It's one of these books. You'll be shocked when you read it that you hadn't discovered it. It's like a Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy kind of thing. Like it's of that level of creativity, and it'll stick with you. And so anyway, the characters in that book are trying to immanentize the Eschaton.
The Eye in the Pyramid, the Golden Apple, Leviathan.
Those three, and then they compile it into a book called the Illuminatus trilogy. So, but it's a serious idea. Before they used the idea in the book, but it goes back before that. It was originated in the 1950s, 1960s by a philosopher named Eric Voegelin, who is one of the brightest kind of thinkers in the 20th century on the nature of sort of the intersection of religion and politics. And what Immanentize the Eschaton means. So Eschaton basically means heaven on earth. Or equivalently maybe hell on earth, right? So Eschaton is in sort of the Christian religion, there's like the second coming, right? And then there's the 1,000 years of Jesus, ruling, and the dead being raised, and then there's ultimately the sort of the Book of Revelations, the apocalypse, and so forth. And so Christianity has its version of the Eschaton. Sometimes you'll hear the term in religious studies eschatology, which is kind of the study of the second coming or the study of the arrival of heaven on earth. Other religions have variations on this. It's basically the moment when everything changes, right? Mm-hmm. It's the moment when the world transforms. It's sort of the arrival of the ultimate vision of whatever a religion has been kind of pushing towards. So that's what that or an equivalent version of that is what's called the Eschaton. And then immanentizing is basically literally translated as like saturating, but it basically means like the complete replacement of the world as we know it today, and the replacement of today's world with this kind of with basically with the arrival of heaven on earth. And then in religious studies, there's this concept of Gnosticism, which is where it starts with a G-N-O-S, Gnosticism. And Gnosticism is this for Christian religious scholars. What they'll tell you is Gnosticism is a Christian heresy that's been running basically in various forms since the origination of Christianity 2,000 years ago. And Gnosticism is basically like, if you're Catholic, for example, what your priest will tell you or what the religious authorities will tell you is that Gnosticism is an attempt by human beings to usurp the role of God, and in the place of God, substitute what's called gnosis, spelled Gnosis. And gnosis is literally secret knowledge.
Yeah.
And so the idea of a Gnostic heresy is that instead of basically relying on God to bring us heaven on earth, that we as humans will develop a secret knowledge that will permit us to do it ourselves. And so, and of course, the Catholic Church has hated this for literally 2,000 years because it's basically, it's literally heretical. It's basically man declaring himself God on the basis of the secret knowledge. And of course, the idea of secret knowledge is very kind of deeply rooted in philosophy. I'll just give you two examples. So the Greeks had this concept they called techne, Techne, which was basically which is the derivation of the word technology, which is basically secret knowledge. And then Christians, of course, the origin of the Christian myth of the Garden of Eden, or the religious idea of the Garden of Eden, is what does Adam do that gets him in all that trouble and gets humanity in all that trouble? He eats from the tree of knowledge, right? He gets the secret knowledge, right? That he was never supposed to have. Because the snake tricks him into doing it, and then he spreads the secret knowledge to Eve, and that's why they get kicked out of paradise, and that's why humanity lives in a fallen state. And so anyway, like it's this very deeply rooted thing that like there's something about secret knowledge that's either really amazing, which is it can either deliver like basically paradise on earth, like literally like heaven on earth, or it's like a form of secret knowledge that can basically destroy everything. Right. Anyway, so this is like this is the way Eric Vogelin describes it. Of course, AI Doomerism is of course exactly what I just described. Like it's AI Doomerism is a classic secular example of basically a Gnostic heresy. What is the secret knowledge? What is the gnosis? Of course, it's AI, right? It's the ability to build AI. What is heaven on earth? It is using AI to bring about the singularity. Right. And remember the basis of the idea of the singularity, right, is it's the moment at which everything changes, right? It's the moment at which mankind no longer can predict what happens in the sequence of human affairs. It's a discontinuous break in human affairs in which everything is different on the other end by applying the secret knowledge. And then, of course, what is the AI apocalypse? It is basically in pursuit of trying to achieve the singularity and trying to achieve heaven on earth. Instead, we generate hell on earth. Yeah. Right, which is the mirror image, but in the same way, this is the thing with Doomerism. It's why they always push it to the ultimate kind of thing of like, oh my God, it's going to destroy everything or change everything. Is this because it's going to be, it can't just be something that's like sometimes good, sometimes bad. It has to be something that's like utterly transformational. And so what's happened with AI Doomerism specifically is you have a lot of extremely smart atheists who are basically disconnected from the religious tradition of their civilization, who have backed themselves into a classic Gnostic heresy, and they're playing out the exact same script that Vogelin describes and that the Catholic Church has been describing for as it describes Gnosticism for thousands of years. They're playing out the exact same thing. It's why they get so freaked out, right? Because like, how can you not get freaked out about the end of the world? And it's why the claims are so fundamentally non-empirical, right? It's why there's no testable hypothesis. It's why there are no metrics. Right. It's why you get these kind of extreme, conclusions up to and including, potentially nuclear war to prevent it from happening, is because you believe it is that transformational. So it's what Vogelin described as a political religion or a secular religion.
It's why your piece is blasphemous in the scheme of things. Yes. There's kind of this whole theory that, if in the absence of religion, people invent things which look like religion to take the place that religion holds in hearts of men and society. And this kind of fits that pattern. Okay, wow. There's been a time when in our show we used to talk about stuff like holding meetings and remote work. And, here we are talking about the second coming of Christ. All right. So, all right, we're going to let you go. Short question and answer. For people listening, give us some ChatGPT prompts.
Or your favorite ones.
I would just say read the Immanentize trilogy.
Yes,
on the topic
I already ordered it.
Eschaton.
It's coming from Amazon on Tuesday, so right. I'm excited for that. Yeah.
And then there's a serious book. So Eric Vogelin, Vogelein, wrote a book called, I think it's called The New Science of Politics. I think in the 1950s. It's a short book. And it describes, if you're interested in what I was just talking about, it describes exactly this process. And as you read it, you'll be like, oh, yes, he's describing exactly what's happening here.
Yeah. Mark, people are 1 hour, 45 minutes in, right? By this time, if they're listening, they're definitely buying this book. Right, like for sure.
This is great.
Yeah, this is great. I'd also highly recommend people buying Private Lies, Public Truths. Actually, a bit hard to find, but highly recommend that people go out and buy that. It's one of our favorite books too.
And if hypothetically you have a hard time finding one of these books because their publishers have been irresponsible at letting them go out of print.
Yeah, I see a collectible edition. I see a Kindle version.
Yeah.
I see
Hold on.
collectible.
Okay, buy the Kindle version. Do not go to the pirate website that I was about to.
Do not. Yes.
But I saw a collectible one. I like the paper books.
Yeah, you don't see me shaking my head here to stop Mark from saying the next sentence I knew he was about to say.
No. Bad idea.
Bring us home. Favorite ChatGPT prompts.
I mean, so for fun, I go straight to Seinfeld scripts, and of increasingly outlandish scenarios. My favorite one so far is the Seinfeld gang goes to a Donald Trump rally. These AIs, they're so nice, right? They're so nice, they're so pleasant. Like contra the vision of like, that they're the Terminator or something. They're so nice and pleasant. And so if you ask them to write fiction, they always want everybody to get along at the end of the story. Or at the end of the script. And so instead I feed it very specific instructions like, the situation just gets more tense and paranoid, as time passes. And then inevitably for some reason, all of my scripts turn into like ninja fights.
You have seen the Twitch stream that, which, makes these things into actual animated cartoons, right?
Oh,
yeah.
Yeah. So there's like the Infinite Seinfeld. And then there's another one I haven't seen yet, but apparently there's an Infinite Family Guy.
I haven't seen that. Yeah,
that apparently is quite funny. So yeah, so those are great. And then the serious prompt, the one that I really enjoy playing with is something along the lines of, and you can do this for lots of different things, but because you can kind of probe. I'm really curious to see kind of how it sort of gets this question of how creative these things really are, or how many inferences they can draw that aren't obvious. And so like for example, list 10 psychological phenomena that are, referred to in like fictional portrayals of human behavior, like in novels, but do not have official terms.
Oh, yes. Yeah. You once shared it with us. Okay. Yeah. That's
like,
cool.
And then by the way, proposed terms. Yeah. And so it's like, because like, so there's one of the theories of like human language is like the most richly developed area of human language is the area that describes people, right? Because that's like the most important thing to us. And so we have any given language has all these different words to describe behavior. But then there's all these behaviors that maybe we just haven't gotten around to making words for yet. But like we notice in our lives, and we just have a hard time talking about.
Yeah.
And so and so there's like a 2-part thing here, which is one is there's like a useful thing to do, which is to actually try to figure these things out, but also trying to get a sense of like in the machine, how well can the machine itself understand human behavior?
Wait, what's an example? I'm curious.
No, but you should actually try this prompt and see the 10. It'll blow you away.
All right.
It's pretty cool.
It's great. And then and then by the way, the great thing about these things is you say that's great, give me 10 more, and then 10 more and 10 more and 10 more, and like it's astonishing. For me, it's just like wow, this thing actually understands human behavior like way better than I think we would assume. By the answers it's able to give. Another fun one that's not mine, it's Alexandros Marinos came up with it, and he talked about it, but it's really fascinating, which again gets this question of creativity, which is, what are ideas, give me examples of ideas from different disciplines of science, where it's the same idea, but each discipline of science, it's an idea in one discipline of science where they're the same ideas in another discipline of science, but under a different name.
Brilliant.
Right?
Yeah.
Right. Or, an equivalent query would be, for the idea of, a specific idea, natural selection and evolution, what other fields of science have that same idea under different names?
Yeah.
Right. Oh, nice. That's a good
right, and to sort of draw out commonalities in thought process that maybe people in those fields haven't even realized, basically correspond to each other. So again, like, does it understand sort of at a deep level of how human reasoning works?
This is not the exact prompt, so you're getting a different set of results. But this is also really impressive.
Well, I had to find out for myself what the previous point you made.
Read out the prompt.
All right, okay. I asked, give me examples of human behavior in fiction that we don't have terms in psychology for, which is not exactly the same thing you said, but I think it's very close up. And the first one, I'll read out one. Frodo's ring syndrome. In Lord of the Rings, Frodo Baggins endures a specific type of temptation and corruption by the One Ring. While some of this is similar to addiction, the ring is both a source of power, but also moral degradation at the same time. The kind of struggle that we don't experience, we don't have a term for. So, wow, this is deep shit.
Yes, it is.
Exactly.
It's really cool. I mean,
They're just
it's
like,
great at like
this is
just
the rea-
finding patterns. Yeah, it's awesome.
This is the reaction I keep having, which is just like, oh my God, like whenever it's happening and to come up with that, like this is new.
On that note,
Mark, truly a delight. If somebody's trying to
if
immanentize,
AI doomerism is what it takes for you to come back online and write a piece on Substack and be on Twitter and show up here, we'll take it.
yeah, we have de-immanentized the Eschaton on this podcast just a little bit. On that note, Mark, always a delight. Come back again. Thank you so much.